Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be speaking about India's fiscal deficit. Imagine you run a household. Every single month you earn about 83 rupees, but you spend about 100 rupees. So you have to borrow 17 to cover that gap. At first it seems fine, but the next month you're paying interest on that loan, and you still can't cut your expenses, so you have to borrow again and again. This is not a personal finance story. This is the story of government of India. So today we look at India's fiscal deficit. What is it? Why it persists? What it costs us? And whether there's a way out. The mechanics are kind of simple. So the government earns revenue through instruments such as income tax, GST, corporate tax, etc. So in FY25, that worked out to roughly 83 paisa for every rupee it spent. So the remaining 17 paisa, that gap, is a fiscal deficit, and it had to be financed by from borrowing from markets, from RBI, and from savings schemes. If you're talking in absolute terms, it's around rupees 16.13 lakh crore in FY25 alone. That is kind of more than an entire GDP of a mid-sized European country. Why should it matter to you? Because the borrowed money doesn't just disappear, it comes back to haunt every Indian citizen. So if you look at the historical trend, problem is not new. Look at the trajectory. In the early 2000, India's deficit was dangerously high. Then came the global financial crisis of 2008 that kind of shot back up the deficit to 6.3%. And then COVID-19 struck, the deficit exploded to 9.3% of GDP. So by 2025, we will kind of reach the stated target of 4.5%. So, but we've heard targets before. Why is the deficit so stubborn? So there are actually four structural reasons. First being the subsidy burden. India roughly spends around 3.8 crores every year on food, fertilizer, and fuel subsidies. The Food Corporation of India alone carries decades of accumulated inefficiency. These are politically untouchable. Second, the tax base is too narrow. India's tax to GDP ratio is around 11%. So a small population is funding a nation of 1.4 billion people because over 60% of our workforce is in the informal sector and they don't pay any direct tax. Third, the interest payment snowball. Today, more than 20% of total government expenditure goes just towards paying interest on past debt. Fourth, the capital expenditure gets squeezed. So around 70% of government spending is revenue expenditures like salaries, pensions, subsidies, none of which actually create any assets or like roads, ports, or hospitals. The spending that actually grows the economy gets cut first when the budget is tight. So why does it directly affect you? So when the government borrows heavily, it competes with private firms and individuals for the same pool of money. That drives the interest rates up, and your home EMI loan, your business loan, all of them become more expensive. Banks chasing safe government bonds lend less to MSMEs and startups. This is the classic case of crowding out effect. Private investment just shrinks when the economy needs it. Internationally, a high deficit signals instability. Foreign investors pull money out, the rupee weakens. And since Indian oil imports electronics, India imports oil, electronics, capital goods. So a weak rupee means higher prices for everything. So if the problem is so clear, why hasn't it been fixed? The political economy is the single biggest barrier. Cutting subsidy means angering around 800 million beneficiaries of food and fuel support. Right before every election cycle, no government in India history has comfortably done this. Then there are states. While the center talks consolidation, state governments are running their own deficits, averaging around 3.2% of GST. The revenue base is rigid. GST collection, despite improvements, remain below potential. In economic slowdowns, buoyancy falls and the deficit widens automatically. Perhaps most insidiously, there is an off-balance sheet debt, PSU borrowings, Food Corporation of India, state obligations, etc. So the path forward exists. It requires political will more than an economic ingenuity. In the near term, India needs to reset the FRBM framework, one that accounts for the cyclical shocks, but enforce the hard ceilings in good times. GST coverage must be broadened. Real estate, petroleum must eventually come under the net. By 2026, direct benefit transfer reform, linking every subsidy to Aadhaar verified beneficiaries, can dramatically reduce leakages. Studies suggest 20 to 30% of subsidies currently leak. Plugging that alone could save around, let's say, 60,000 crore annually. In 2027, 2027 should see serious disinvestment and asset monetization. In 2028, a binding state fiscal responsibility pact. No more competitive freebie politics without fiscal accountability. The 2030 target brings back consolidated deficit. Center plus states. So below, both of them combined below 3.5% of GDP. This would put India back on trajectory consistency with Viksit Bharat's vision. So let me leave you with one thought. Fiscal deficit is not a number in budget document. It is a choice. Choice about who pays and who benefits and when. Every rupee borrowed today is a tax on tomorrow's citizen. It is an invisible regressive tax that falls heaviest on those who never voted for that spending. So the question is not can India consolidate its finances? The question is, will it choose to? So I'm leaving you with this thought. Thank you.